Hello everyone, I'm Brazen Eagle, and thank you for joining me here. So today, we have an article from Breitbart, of course, about the death of Zimbabwe's dictator and president, or former president, Robert Mugabe. But we also have an article from The Atlantic about how he destroyed the country of Zimbabwe. But let's begin with Breitbart. So ex-Zimbabwe dictator Robert Mugabe dead at the age of 95. Former Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe died Friday at the age of 95. His successor, Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, confirmed the death on Twitter and offered his condolences. He said Mugabe was an icon of liberation, a Pan-Africanist who dedicated his life to the emancipation and the empowerment of his people. His contribution to the history of our nation and continent will never be forgotten. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Yes, genocide, always good, right? Always good. Many others will disagree with that sentiment, saying a man at first lauded as a genuine liberator of Africa eventually became a blood-soaked tyrant who took his own country from the breadbasket of Africa to basket case in one generation. His 40-year leadership of the former British colony was marked with bloodshed, persecution of political opponents, and vote rigging on an industrial scale. Mugabe's lasting legacy was epistemalized by British author Andrew Norman in his book, Robert Mugabe and the Betrayal of Zimbabwe. He wrote, "Instead of leading his people to the promised land, Mugabe, on the one hand, amassed a fortune for himself, his family, and his followers, and on the other hand, presided over the deliberate murder, torture, and starvation of those who opposed him. In short, Mugabe betrayed his people." Born on February 21, 1924, in what was then British-ruled southern Rhodesia, the self-confessed Marxist was raised in a Catholic mission before becoming a school teacher. He joined the National Democratic Party under Joshua Nkomo in its fight against the government of Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith, who had broken away from Britain in 1965 in an effort to prevent the introduction of black majority rule. Mugabe was jailed for 10 years in 1964 for anti-government comments, and on release in 1974, joined and later led the victorious guerrilla war conducted from Mozambique against Smith's breakaway regime. He rose through the ranks of the rebels to become the head of the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front. As ZANU leader, he became Prime Minister of the new Republic of Zimbabwe in 1980 and assumed the role of president 7 years later. In 2000, he led a campaign to evict white farmers from their lands, which was given to black Zimbabweans and, of course, led to famine. Mugabe retained a strong grip on power through allegations of vote rigging, elections on a monumental scale, until he was forced to resign in November 2017 at the age of 93. His brutal record will live long after his name is forgotten. Zimbabwean Senator David Coulthard, who was once labeled as an enemy of the state by Mugabe, said his legacy was marred by his adherence to violence as a political tool. He was always committed to violence, going all the way back to the 1960s. He was no MLK Jr., he told the BBC World Service. He never changed in that regard. Well, he was a communist. Both of them were. Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore, all the way in Singapore, since April when he died. His funeral arrangements have yet to be announced. Wow, he couldn't even get healthcare service in his own country. But anyways, so, really, some people know, or even know, that Mugabe was a tyrant and, of course, a communist, but many people, especially younger people from my generation, know little to nothing about this dead leader. Or they don't even know very much about Zimbabwe or even the short history of the country of Rhodesia. So, I wanted to know how he destroyed Zimbabwe after he took power in 1980, or began to take power in 1980. So this article is from The Atlantic from December 2003, and it lays out 10 things Mugabe did to destroy Zimbabwe. I'm not going to read the entire article, but I will go over its main points. Let's start, though, with some background information. In 1965, Rhodesia was home to about 4 million black Africans and about a little over 200,000 white Zimbabweans. So 200,000 white Zimbabweans is quite a small minority in the country. In 2018, there were about 14.3 million black Zimbabweans and maybe around 30,000 white Zimbabweans. In Rhodesia, before it became Zimbabwe, it was ran by Prime Minister Ian Smith, who tried to maintain some sort of order and stability in the country. In 1980, there was a small civil war that cost around 30,000 lives, which kind of pales in comparisons to other major wars, but regardless, the country was renamed Zimbabwe, and Robert Mugabe became Prime Minister, and in 1987, I believe, he became President as well. So, the first thing Robert Mugabe did was to confiscate the lands held by the white farmers, even though the vast majority of the land owned by the white farmers was actually legally purchased from the Mugabe government. Interesting. He took the land away from the people that bought it from him. He played the race card to gather support from black Zimbabweans and let those individuals attack the white farmers, who of course held the farmlands and some sort of wealth in the country. And because of this, the agricultural production in Zimbabwe dropped extremely sharply and has helped cause major food shortages. Now, the second thing, or another thing that Mugabe did, was to put in place, of course, price controls on agricultural products, which has led to starvation across the country. It was only because of the Western countries like the United States, maybe Germany, France, that Zimbabwe has not yet experienced extreme mass starvation, but of course this information is from 2003. Now it's 2019, but it's still because of Western countries that has given money to Zimbabwe to make sure that not everyone starves, but there is still starvation in Zimbabwe, and it's only because of the generosity of the Western countries. Now, the third thing that Mugabe did was crush any sort of dissenting opinions to control public ideas and thoughts. By controlling the only method for people to actually obtain food in the country, because of a government program Mugabe set up, he ensured that people had to pledge their allegiance to the government in order to actually eat. Tens of thousands of people were actually tortured just alone in 2002, and a few hundred, of course, died in political murders. But, whatever, right? The fourth thing Mugabe did was instill, or implement, a huge number of laws that limited, we'll say, the possibility of growth in the economy. By trying to control the entire country's market, the people of Zimbabwe overall became poorer, and a black market flourished as your common Zimbabwean became poorer and poorer. Number 5. It obviously says teach hate, but Mugabe began youth academies that basically were engineered to be little paramilitary camps. Mugabe wanted to ensure that he was protected from them, or protected from any sort of dissenting individuals, by controlling the youth, and to have a small loyal army to do his bidding. Sounds pretty much like a dictator to me. Number 6. Tourism used to be an important part of the Rhodesian economy, but Mugabe helped kill tourism to his nation. From my understanding, which is of course limited, Zimbabwe was home, or it actually still is home, to the very beautiful and awe-inspiring natural wonders of the world, like the Victoria Falls, but tourists, especially international tourists, do not want to come to a country that is openly hostile to white farmers, or even cracks down harshly on any sort of political opposition. Now, number 7 is something you really didn't hear about too much. Zimbabwe, under Mugabe, he invaded the Congo to get rich off of mineral resources such as diamonds, cobalt, and timber. Because of this, the cost to invade the Congo actually hurt Zimbabweans and made his own soldiers angry when they demanded compensation for their sacrifice. But the soldiers ended up with very little in the end, which of course pissed them all off. The 8th thing Mugabe did was ignore AIDS and HIV, which actually helped lower the life expectancy for an average Zimbabwean from 56 years of age to 35 years old. That's an extreme drop. The life expectancy fell by more than 20 years. Mugabe, of course, ignored this. The 9th thing Mugabe did, let's keep it on screen, was commit genocide against some of his former allies. He attacked the Ndebele people, I guess it's some sort of subgroup within Zimbabwe, who actually try to help fight against the rulers of Zimbabwe, or what was known as Rhodesia at the time. In short, Robert Mugabe backstabbed his own allies for his own personal gain. Alright, and finally, the 10th thing, or one of the 10th thing out of a list of things Mugabe did, was to blame other people across the world for his own problems that he helped create. He put all of the blame of the terrible conditions that the Zimbabwean people experienced on the white man, despite the relative peace and stability in Rhodesia before it was permanently transformed. Now, I'm not saying Rhodesia was a perfect country. No country is, but honestly, it sounds pretty normal to blame someone else for your own problems. But, regardless, this was actually a pretty long article from 2003 that went fairly in-depth, not extremely in-depth, but fairly in-depth into the problems that was piling up in Zimbabwe up to 2003, which, like I said before, was a long, long time ago for some of us, and it's never talked about, just never even brought up, especially in history books, about the failures of communism, because Mugabe, he was a communist, but of course that doesn't fit today's narrative. But, never forget that history is written by the victors, and important information is and will be lost when countries die. So, this is where I ask you, my audience, to lay down some information and facts for younger people from my generation about the country of Rhodesia, not Zimbabwe, but the country of Rhodesia, and what life was like way before I was even born, because many of us, like I said earlier, don't even know what Rhodesia even was. So, and I would personally like some information regarding that country. So, anyways, with that in mind, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Brazen Eagle, and I hope you have a great day.